Well, howdy. This is Best Available Podcast, episode 16. This will not be the last episode we do in November. We'll have one more, but this is the last episode we'll do before Thanksgiving. We're in the swing of the holiday season. My dad put some of the outside Christmas lights up on Saturday just because he recognized that the weather was very nice and he just wanted to get it done. Everything is not up yet. The tree's not up. We have other stuff that goes in the front yard. That stuff's not up, but we got the lights up, so we got step one accomplished. It's sunny today. When I woke up, it was cloudy. I was up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was raining. But now it's really just kind of windy, I guess. And that's they got the cold front pushing through. So that was meteorology talk. We got a lot of fun stuff to talk about. We'll talk about the NFL for a little bit, but we're gonna do a bulk of this episode, and it's gonna be centered around college basketball. We have a college basketball expert on the show today. He's accredited, and he will be taking us through everything that we need to know because the season is starting soon. Knock on wood, we can get through most of the games this year. Time will tell, but regardless, all the information you will ever need will be right here. And then we'll also talk about a Disney movie. This week's assigned Disney movie was Moana. So we'll be talking about that and maybe some other surprises as well. Matt, how are you?
Well, Ryan, when you say we have a certified expert on the show, I didn't know we were getting Glenn Denigris in on the Zoom call. He is a certified college basketball expert.
He is.
So multiple things, Ryan, off of what you said. First off, you forgot to mention our little run-in on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
Our little coincidental run-in at the at East Ridge Pizza, located in Willingboro, New Jersey, right on the border, I think, between West Hampton and Willingboro. It's kind of, I would say, more on the Willingboro side, but anyway, that's our favorite pizza restaurant. Ryan and his mother were getting pizza right as my family pulled up to get ours after running some errands. So it's a very nice little surprise. You got your, I'm glad you get two pies as well. One pie is not enough for our family.
Well, and the
Very good
pizza
pizza.
there is thin, so you can't just
Yeah.
one regular slice. That's not the same. So you need two.
So if anyone lives in South Jersey or is in the area, that I would say that's up there for one of the better slices in the Burlington County like area. I would say like the
That's
metro. Yeah, like the Philly metro area on the Jersey side. That's one of the better slices that you're gonna get.
That's number two on my list. I have a comprehensive pizza list of all the places I've been, and that's number two. It's always very good. It's consistent. You know what you're getting. It's just a great slice. So I agree with Matt. If you're ever in the
Well,
area, you got to try that.
Well, the guy that makes the pizzas too is the same guy that's been making them since my dad worked there back in like the, I don't know, like the late 70s or 80s or something. So he's been making the same pie for decades. So it's been nice to see the consistency continue. Other things, so we purchased a new Christmas tree. So we
Mm,
do the artificial tree.
yep.
The one we've had, I'd say they last a long time, but ours is kind of getting like a little crooked at the top. Like you could tell, like in the Christmas tree bag that it's in, it's kind of wearing out a little bit. So we got a newer tree, but we're going to keep the old tree up. So we're doing two trees this year, one in one side of the house and then one towards the back. So that'll be exciting. So technically one's up, but it doesn't have any ornaments on it because we had to test it out. We've had quite the ordeal getting this Christmas tree, Ryan. We originally ordered one from QVC, but a strand of lights didn't work. And that
Yeah.
was the nicest of the ones we found. Then we went and got one from Target. We brought it back and it was too big for the room we were putting it in. And that was a nice tree too. So we ended up, if you are going to Monmouth, Ryan, on 537, right as you get on the 195, that seasonal store
Sure.
right next to the McDonald's and the
Yeah.
Burger King, right near Six Flags. I would recommend, I know you're a big Christmas guy. If you're looking for decorations or whatever, I would say take a ride with your parents out there. Great place. Lots of stuff going on there. So that's where we ended up getting this tree from. So I recommend anyone, as we've made a pizza recommendation already, go there if you want to get, some seasonal stuff. There's not too many of those places where we are anymore. Like there were when we were kids, like seasonal stores with like all the Christmas stuff, but not anymore. So I
I
was
think
talking Christmas.
I think we're gonna put ours up on Friday, so the day after Thanksgiving. Um, and that's probably earlier than we've ever put it up before. I think normally my dad and I would be watching the Flyers as they play every Black Friday. That's kind of a tradition. Unfortunately, we can't do that this year. I don't know when their season's going to begin. That still seems to be up in the air. But unfortunately, there's no Flyers hockey on Black Friday this year. So we're going to put our time towards other productive tasks, like putting up our artificial tree. Um,
Well,
but
Ryan, I got something that could fill in right at that 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock slot for
I'm
you.
sure you do, and I'm sure we're going to get into it once we get into the college basketball preview. By the way, if you listened to the podcast last week, you'll know that I was reading a book called The Dynasty by Jeff Benedict. I finished that book a couple of days ago, and I cannot recommend it enough. It was a great look into the New England Patriots dynasty, and it was a little over 500 pages, but it was a quick 500 pages. It was a nice, easy read, but still chock full of information. So check that out. And now I've moved on to my second book, which is Tanking to the Top. I think 7 chapters in. So this is about the 76ers and their process of, some would call it tanking. But regardless, this has been a nice look into stuff. I mean, I'm a fan of the Sixers, so this was a little different from the Patriots book. But there's still stuff in here that I was never aware of. Like there was a story in here about Nerlens Noel, about how he was always late. Someone said he would be late to his own funeral, how he would always smell of weed, which I was never aware of that. But there's some interesting things in here. I'm excited to read more into it. So that was my book of the week. That's what we're on. And yeah, so now we can get into some NFL games. By the way, you might notice that I'm wearing a dress shirt and a tie, and my co-host is wearing a t-shirt. That's because I had to do a job interview. I'm not trying to show him up. That was
Well, no,
just
you have won the award outside of when we had Dr. Matt Harmon on. You have won the award for best dressed on the show. So I don't think anyone could compete with Dr. Matt Harmon with the vest, with the puffy vest and the long sleeve T-shirt,
no
his patented look. But you're a close second.
stop. You're
But
too
yeah,
kind. But you know what else is great to talk about is the NFL. Week 11, great transition. There were some games. Now we're not going to talk about the NFL as long as we normally would, and in part that's because we do want to talk about college basketball, but it's also because the games themselves, the slate did not turn out to be super great. There are some competitive scores, but overall, there's not really a whole lot to talk about. I'd say the biggest early game with any implications was Tennessee and Baltimore. Both of those teams entered at 6-3. Both of them were one of 6 teams in the AFC that entered the day at 6-3. And the Titans ended up winning in overtime, 30-24, on a run by Derrick Henry. So the Ravens have now fallen to 6-4. They are in real danger now of missing the playoffs. They do have winnable games coming up, but to drop that game to the Titans, that could be huge for tie-breaking purposes. We talked about it a little bit last week, Matt. Both of these teams, they started out well and then they fell off a little bit, but it's not over. Obviously, there's still 6 weeks left in the season. I guess these teams, they'll still do some jostling in the standings, I would presume, but this was a huge win for Tennessee. I mean, it had been a while since they put together a performance like this. There was that little brouhaha at center field at the beginning of the game, or I'd say beginning prior to the game. But this was I don't know. I don't remember if we used the F word for either of these two teams, but for Tennessee, they get back into their winning ways, and now they'll have a chance to battle the Indianapolis Colts next week. That'll be a fun game to watch. But Matt, I think the bigger takeaway from this was Baltimore. We talked about it last week. I said there was a chance they could miss the playoffs, and now they've lost 2 in a row with a difficult game coming up this Thursday on Thanksgiving night. And if you're a Ravens fan, I think you should be at least a little concerned right now because there's a real possibility that your team isn't playing in January this year.
Well, if you expand that stretch, since their bye week, they're 1-3, and granted, it's against Pittsburgh, Indy, New England, and Tennessee, but these are games if you're a playoff contender that you're supposed to win. And if you look at their wins before the bye, Ryan, I mean, they're not really beating impressive teams. You beat the Texans, even though I don't know if we're really going to talk about them. I think Houston's record is very deceiving. But then you play teams like Washington, Cincinnati, the Eagles, and you barely beat the Eagles too. And that kind of goes to show, although they can't control the teams they play, they're not really winning impressive games. And I don't know if I want to use the F word. I just don't think they're very good, right? And there's a difference. I just don't think they're as good as people have made them out to be in the preseason. And they'll finish the season really strong, Ryan, because you play Jacksonville, New York, and the Giants, and Cincinnati as your last three games. So people are going to kind of fall back in love with the Ravens as we get closer to January. So there's a possibility they could. But as you mentioned, this tiebreaker is going to be really big. And I just don't know what it is about this team. I think we talked about it last week. I think I said the exact same thing. Like, they're scoring points, kind of. They're getting defensive plays when they need to, kind of. They're just not putting it together for a full 60 minutes. Maybe the league has just, and I said this last week, maybe they just have figured out Lamar Jackson. The league did it with Cam Newton and other players of the style, the running mobile quarterback. And you can make the case, too, that they're starting to figure out Josh Allen a little bit as well. But I don't know. I don't know what it is. I think the thing that hurts Lamar Jackson is that they don't really, and you mentioned this last week, there's not a lot of receivers to help him throw the ball to, right? So we're all just kind of going all in on his ability to run the ball. The difference was with these other mobile quarterbacks, Josh Allen has guys to throw to. Kyler Murray has guys to throw to. Cam Newton, in theory, when he was in Carolina, had guys to throw to. Lamar Jackson doesn't really have guys to throw to down the field. So that takes a whole dimension of their offense out of the picture.
Yeah, you brought it up, and I said it last week. I think their receivers are really one-dimensional. And that's not to say they're not talented, but I think they just need some more creativity and innovation from that position. And I also said that this team will be fine next year, but for this year specifically, you should be concerned, and you should really be concerned because of what happened in the other game that dealt with the AFC North early on that meant something, which was Philadelphia and Cleveland. Cleveland improved to 7-3. They beat the Eagles, and now Cleveland finds themselves, as I said, at 7-3. They were on the outside looking in coming into a week, and now they find themselves as the 6th seed in the AFC. They're one of 4 teams that are 7-3 in the AFC. So the AFC playoff race is very exciting this year. It'll be great to follow for these final 6 weeks. But now you look at a team like Cleveland. I talked about this a little last week. They had winnable games coming up, and as long as they win those games, they'll be fine and they'll make the playoffs. And now you still have the game against Jacksonville next week. You have 2 games against the Giants and the Jets. The Giants game isn't going to be easy, but they should still win that game. That gets you to 10 wins right there. You just need one other win, and you'll be locked into the playoffs. So Cleveland, this was a good win against a team that they should have beat, and they did. It was a lot closer than it should have been. But now Cleveland finds themselves at 7-3. So Matt, are you confident that this team can make the playoffs, or are you still a little hesitant?
I said this when we did the preview. For a team with the track record that the Browns have, they kind of have to show me. But I am having increasing levels of confidence that this team can do it. The difference between the Ravens winning marginal close games and the Browns winning these close games, which is what they have been doing in a lot of their wins, is that we expect Baltimore to blow teams out because they are supposed to have all these talented offensive pieces. Cleveland, with all the injuries they've had and the fact that Baker Mayfield has still kind of underperformed at times this season, they're still grinding out wins. In the fact that they've played in basically like a hurricane the past 2 weeks, also in Cleveland, with torrential downpours and high winds, and to be able to hold off the Eagles team that's fighting for their divisional, superiority at this point in the season, it's a good win. I think Nick Chubb is fantastic, Ryan. I think their ability to run the ball. I want to be careful with how I say this. Kind of masks the flaws that Baker Mayfield has as a quarterback, because he's still trying to figure things out. And we've kind of criticized. I've been a critic of Baker Mayfield this season, but listen, a win's a win. You come out of that 3-game stretch that they've had at home, all of which were poor weather conditions to generate any kind of momentum offensively. They came out of that stretch 2-1, and their one loss was to a playoff caliber team in Vegas. So I think that Jacksonville game, Ryan, is going to be a trap game for them. I really do, because Jacksonville has given Pittsburgh and Green Bay somewhat trouble. Pittsburgh more so in the first half, Green Bay the whole game. So that'll be an interesting thing to see if they could go and win these kind of trap games in nicer weather, granted. So you were right, Ryan. I was wrong. The Browns appear to be on their way to the playoffs. So I will admit that.
Well, I'll be interested to see if Jacksonville goes back to Gardner Minshew, because he's getting close to a return. And Luton, he was solid his first performance, but he's since come back down to earth a little bit, which I think was to be expected. So I'll be interested to see if they go back to Gardner. There was a first-time starting quarterback also in the Falcons and Saints game. The Falcons did not look very good. They had a good pregame tweet, but that was about the highlight of their day. Taysom Hill, surprisingly, looked pretty efficient. Everyone knows that he can run with the ball, and that's how he got 2 touchdowns, but he passed the ball pretty well too, I thought, at least. I don't know if he's a long-term answer. I wouldn't go that far, but he did what the team needed him to do, and he led the Saints to 8-2. So if you look at the NFC picture now, that, along with the game we'll talk about in a bit, leapfrog the Saints up to the number 1 seed in the NFC. Now, this team, for a little bit of time, I was a little unsure of them. I still am to an extent, but now the defense look confident. They're playing like people thought they would at the start of the year. We'll see if they continue getting production out of Taysom Hill while Breeze is on the mend. But Matt, the Saints are starting to come around a little bit. Now, every team in this conference has flaws, but the Saints could very well end up being the one that makes it out come January.
Yeah, New Orleans theoretically has 3 quarterbacks at this point, all of which could go in and be effective. I think everyone, rightfully so, was kind of hesitant on Taysom Hill's ability to lead an NFL offense for a full 60 minutes at quarterback, mainly because we haven't really seen it for a full 60 minutes. But you're right, he made the throws that he had to make. I think the defense coming around has been the bigger kind of indicator for New Orleans. Obviously, I mentioned being on my fantasy team has made me follow them a lot closer than I would have if they weren't. And they're playing exponentially better now as opposed to earlier on in the season. A lot of pressure on the quarterback. Obviously, Trey Hendrickson now tied for the NFL lead in sacks, so they're putting a lot more pressure on. The secondary is playing a lot better. They picked off Matt Ryan twice. So, yeah, it's a team that you and I were waiting for to kind of put together full performances. And just when they were, we talked about it with Breeze getting hurt, but Taysom Hill appears to be a viable option for the coming weeks. Obviously, with the 11 rib fractures that Drew Brees has, I don't know how long that's going to take to heal, but they lucked out in the sense that they played the Falcons, then the Broncos, then the Falcons again, then the Eagles. So theoretically, by almost Christmas time, you can get Drew Brees back, which is when you start playing better teams. So New Orleans lucked out in a sense, but it shows that Sean Payton kind of knows what he's doing by keeping a guy like Taysom Hill around. So it was a good overall performance. I was happy that he started to use a lot of his weapons too. Michael Thomas seems like he's back. He's got Emmanuel Sanders kind of in in the realm too of using his top guys. So he had to make the throws, and I agree, he looked pretty good.
So, Matt, your Detroit Lions are still in the hunt mathematically. They're still right there in the graphic. Realistically, their season is now over. They got shut out by the Carolina Panthers, who had to start PJ Walker and who were still without Christian McCaffrey. I think this is a good indication for Matt Rule and Joe Brady and that coaching staff. They've looked competent all year long. I think a win like this is good, but Matt Patricia's seat is on fire. Some people are predicting that he might get fired after this Thanksgiving game on Thursday. We've talked about this endless amounts of times this year because this Detroit Lions team should have been better than they are. Matt, when do you fire Patricia? I guess is the question.
I mean, I probably would have done it already. It's a shame, and I don't know if I've said this before, but it's a shame that Matt Stafford's career has just been wasted by bad coaching, bad front office decisions, or just not enough weapons around him. In this case, it was kind of a combination of all of it. You can't really say that he didn't play well. He wasn't really thrown to a lot of good players, and they couldn't really move the ball in offense. I think Patricia just isn't the guy. I think out of that New England coaching tree, the obvious better choice was Brian Flores, and he was a year out. I think Patricia's a great coordinator. I think he's a little too cocky in regards to his ability coaching overall as a head coach. So it's a shame. It really is, because in our lifetime, Ryan, well, let me rephrase. Since like 2010, when Stafford kind of started picking up a little bit, this is kind of the bigger what ifs of teams in the NFL, right? I mean, they've had Calvin Johnson, they've had Matt Stafford, but they just, for whatever reason, haven't been able to put it together and win games in the playoffs. It's a shame, and I feel bad for Lions fans. Me being a day one lifer of Detroit, it pains me to say it. But in terms of Carolina, Ryan, I don't want to hijack the conversation away from Detroit, but they have really good receivers. This is something that, I kind of looked at the beginning of the season and said, okay, yeah, cool, but it's going to take a while. But Carolina is better than like a lot of people thought they were. So they're a lot closer to being competitive in this division than I anticipated, and that America anticipated as well. So they're on the move a lot quicker. I was wrong about the Matt Rule hire. I will admit that, but Detroit's got to do something. Maybe bringing in an offensively minded head coach. Like, I don't know what it is to fix this team.
I think it's just an organizational failure from top to bottom, and it's something that they're going to have to address if they want to become contenders. But yeah, this organization seems to have always been a few years away from being a few years away, and the Patricia hire clearly was the wrong one, and it's going to set them back even more. So hopefully they can get it right next time around. I hope so for that fan base that's been starved for good competitive teams, and they haven't gotten them for most of our lifetime. Maybe in the future we'll be talking about how good they are. Going through the other,
because the thing is
sure.
they've always been in the hunt, Ryan. They've always been like a 500 team. They've never really been like either like a really bad team or a really good team. I mean, I can't remember of too many times that they've only made the playoffs, I think, twice in my memory of being a football fan. The time they played Dallas, and then they played Seattle another time. They're the only two times I remember them being in the playoffs. They were both a 6 seed.
They made it in 2011. They went 10-6, and they lost every time they lost in the wild card round. In fact, so they made it 2011, 2014, 2016. The last time they made it past the wild card round was 1991. And ever since then, every time they made the playoffs, they've lost in the wild card round. So this team, for the longest time, has just they've never gotten it together. Of course, they were the first team in our lifetime to go 0-16. Everybody knows that. but it kind of seemed like after that they started getting guys. They started getting Stafford and Ndamukong Suh, Calvin Johnson. Looked like they were finally starting to turn the corner, but Jim Schwartz proved to not be a great head coach. They had Caldwell; he was okay, but I understand why they want to take the next step. But now they've taken 2 steps back by getting rid of Caldwell and hiring Patricia. So hopefully they're able to kind of turn the corner again, like it looked like they were doing about a decade ago. But I don't know. I feel bad for that fan base. They deserve better.
Yeah, well, it wasn't the Caldwell firing after they went 10-6. Wasn't that after one of those playoff appearances?
They made the playoffs in 16. He came back in 2017. They went 9-7, and then they did not make the playoffs, and they let him go.
All right, so it was after a winning season. Um, I was kind of confused. Was Jim Caldwell the guy that's going to take you to winning the division? I don't know, but I don't know if I would have taken a risk on Patricia. But who knows, Ryan? It kind of shows the two different directions of these teams going, and obviously having almost identical records. But I'm a lot more confident in Carolina making the playoffs in the near future as opposed to this Detroit team with an aging quarterback, virtually no running backs, and poor management.
Yeah, I mean, this team has had 9 head coaches this century. You're probably not going to be successful if that's the case. Going around the other early games, Washington got back into the NFC East playoff race, and they won 20-9, but it was overshadowed by the fact that Joe Burrow tore his ACL and he'll be out for the remainder of this season, although he should be back for next year, apparently. The Steelers improved to 10-0 pretty easily, and the Patriots lost a close one. So that probably just about did it for their playoff hopes. It was close, lasted 10 weeks, but they're about done, I would say. It was, I think, the matchup of the 2 oldest head coaches combined in history with Romeo Crennel and Bill Belichick. So that was cool. That was a nice fun fact. Damian Harris looks kind of good. Matt, that's a positive.
I mean, there's a lot of positives to take away from just where the roster is for next year. Like I mentioned last week, they'll be right back in the mix next year. This is just a bye year. Bill saw that it's kind of, could be affected by COVID, no fans in the stands. He figured this is a year to kind of just retool the roster. Cam Newton looked really good too.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
That one throw to Demir Bird down the field. That's why I'm not opposed to bringing him back. Houston's just a better team than their record shows. We talked about how they started really poorly, but they also played basically every good team in the NFL. So in my opinion, they lost to a pretty good team, at least better than their record shows. I don't know if you would agree. I don't think Houston's a 3-7 team. I think they've looked better since O'Brien left, obviously, but I
Recently,
think
I agree.
I think they're a lot better because, obviously O'Brien was a factor in their, what was it, 0-whatever start, 0-4 start, but you also opened the season with Kansas City, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Minnesota. So take it as you will. I think Deshaun Watson's really good. The Patriots defense couldn't tackle anyone though, so that's why they looked pretty good yesterday. But I'll give credit where credit's due. I think Houston isn't as bad as their record indicates.
Well, if the Patriots had even a half decent defense, their record might be a little different this year, but the defense has been a major issue this year. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong. That's just what I've seen.
Well, no, the defense can't tackle. The defense has not been good. They give up chunk plays. Part of that, the issue is that they had so many opt-outs defensively of key guys that you have to, Bill didn't really plan for that. And by that point, you're already capped out. So no Dante Hightower, no Patrick Chung. You're losing a lot of guys, the defensive play callers. Hightower was a defensive play caller. So it's kind of just a retooling year. I think the young guys they have are good, but they're young. They just give up too many chunk plays. You're right. The defense is an issue. And that's why Houston looked good yesterday. But I don't know. They'll be fine next year.
I agree. If you're writing off the Patriots, you're Just don't do that. That's not a smart thing to do. The 4 o'clock games, Miami had a bad loss. They really should have beaten the Denver Broncos and gotten to 7-3, but instead now they find themselves on the outside looking in for the playoff race at 6-4. They're one of three teams now at the 6-4, with the Ravens and a team we'll talk about in a bit. The Broncos offense, it still didn't look great. I mean, Melvin Gordon ran for 2 touchdowns, but Drew Lock, he still struggled a bit. But Matt, this was a bad loss for Miami. I mean, they still have winnable games coming up, and especially now, some of these teams have Cincinnati on their schedule. Those games obviously aren't as challenging now with the loss of Joe Burrow. But you look at Miami, they have a game against Kansas City and the Raiders and the Bills. But the next 2 games they have are the Jets and the Bengals. I mean, if they can win those 2 games, get to 8-4 before this final 4-game stretch, maybe they have a chance. I think the bigger story was that Tua got benched. Some people thought it was because he had an ankle injury, but it came out that he was indeed benched, and Flores thought Fitzpatrick gave them the best chance to win. Uh, with that said, however, he said the Tua will be starting next week, which I think is fine because they're playing the Jets. But Matt, this is. Do you agree with? I respect Flores for making that tough decision, but do you agree with benching Tua because he thought that Fitzpatrick gave him the best chance to win?
Well, this was the narrative that I think we all kind of anticipated when the decision was made during the bye week that Tua was going to be the guy going forward, because they were, and we said it, they were right in the mix for the playoff hunt. So now it kind of puts this weird dimension into it to where you're in the playoff mix and you obviously want to play to win, but you also want your young quarterback to develop. But at the same time, if you have like a average 8-8 season and miss the playoffs, that doesn't help you in terms of draft position. But yet again, I think they have the Houston pick anyway, so they're going to cash out regardless. But even still, going 8-8 doesn't really help you. So you want to try and win every game. I can't really get in the mind of Flores. I think he's done a really good job. And I think benching him shows accountability in some ways, because yes, to that point, won every start up until yesterday. But do I think he's looked as good as other rookie quarterbacks? No. So I think there's room for improvement. I think that putting him in mid-season doesn't really help his cause either. But, if Fitzpatrick gives you the best chance to win, he almost brought him down and won, too. The defense made a big play. Mm-hmm. I think the big thing for Miami, the defense reminds me of the Patriots defense from 2 years ago. They brought a lot of the same schemes down there. Watched, I don't know if it was you or someone retweeted or liked the tweet that compared the two. So I see the comparisons there. It's just the offense isn't a playoff caliber offense yet. Part of that's not having Gaskin. I get that. But if he thought Fitzpatrick was the guy, go for it. I mean, I'm happy they didn't go back to Fitzpatrick next week, but we'll see. I think a big indicator will be how he plays, how he responds next week against an 0-10 team.
Well, you talk about 0-10. The Jets' perfect season did, in fact, continue as they lost their 10th game in a row this year, and they fall to 0-10. And you talk about rookie quarterbacks. I've been wrong before, but I was really wrong about Justin Herbert, and I was very adamant about it around the draft, leading up to the draft, that this guy was going to be a bust. Whoever took him was going to be very upset. I was really worried when the Chargers did it because I didn't think that was their guy. Well, lo and behold, this guy looks like a potential superstar at quarterback, maybe an elite talent at the position at some point down the line. He has looked incredible every week. And I said it a few weeks ago, this was not the guy that I watched at Oregon. And I knew there were some things working against him when he was in college, but this guy is completely different. He looks like a 10 to 15-year starter at the position, and a high level starter at that. So I think it's safe to say, especially now that Burrow is injured, that Herbert, not that Herbert hadn't really locked it up earlier, but it looks like he's pretty much locked up offensive rookie of the year. I'd be shocked if he doesn't win it at this point. Um, but yeah, this was just a way for me to say that I was dead wrong again about Justin Herbert. He has proven me wrong each week.
Yeah. Somewhere Zach Cosenza is just loving you saying this, Ryan.
I'm gonna get the
The
text. I'm
debates.
awaiting the text of the group. Is like
Yeah. I really like Herbert. I really do. It sucks for him that he plays in the same division as Patrick Mahomes because he's not going to get as many division titles as someone of his caliber probably could. He also looks like a 10-year-old dude or 10-year-old kid with his new haircut. I didn't realize how young his face was until he got a haircut. So he looks really young, which I guess is good for just saying, we're going to have this guy for a very long time kind of thing. Chargers are good. Like they just are unlucky. And I've said this before, like they have guys, he has Keenan Allen, he has, a plethora at this point of running backs that are pretty decent. Still be good down the road. I'm happy the Chargers are getting, the building blocks in place. I'm just sad that it's not in San Diego. I'm worried about what SoFi Stadium will look like next year, hopefully, when we could get fans in the stands. I'm worried as to what that's going to look like compared to Rams games and compared to how it would look in San Diego. So that's the only thing I'm worried about. But when you hit on a guy like this and he's playing like this, that will really help your cause to get fans there.
I agree 100%. This is why they drafted him. They thought that he could be the guy that would bring back eyes to the organization. And to his credit, that's what he's doing. I can definitely see a scenario where he becomes one of the most popular players in the league at some point down. I mean, he's already trending towards that point anyway. I mean, you see all these throws on social media every single week. That's the best situation you could have hoped for if you were the Chargers. But I do agree. I wish it was, because I've been playing some of the older Maddens recently. I do wish that they were still in San Diego.
And he's
That
giving Russell Wilson some competition for best deep ball thrower in the league. Herbert he throws a really good deep ball.
Yeah.
So he's getting up there. Obviously, I think Russell Wilson, Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen, but I think Herbert, rightfully so, has started to push his name into that conversation. He can really throw it.
as an Eagles fan, it makes me jealous that these other teams can have fun young quarterbacks. The Vikings had a dreadful loss. They had the opportunity to leapfrog the Bears and get themselves to just one game out of the playoff race in the NFC, but instead they fall to 4-6 with a 31-28 loss to the Vikings. The Cowboys now, with the win, find themselves in a three-way tie for second place in the NFC East at 3-7 behind the division-leading 3-6-1 Philadelphia Eagles. And for those of you keeping score at home, yes, that means that there will be a new division leader on Thursday when Dallas and Washington play. So that'll be fun. That'll be a good way for the network to market that one. A battle for the NFC East division lead at 4-7. I was really starting to buy into the Vikings, and they stomped on all my hopes and dreams. It was a shame. It's not even like they put together a solid game plan, but you can't. This was a game that they really needed to win because they have some games coming up that are winnable. They play Jacksonville, they play Chicago, they play Detroit. Maybe you throw Carolina in there. The potential was there to maybe run the table and get a sneak into the playoffs. But I think with this loss, that's about over.
Yeah, the one thing that helps their cause is that Chicago looks really bad as well. But we were all starting to get on the Vikings hype train. They were winning and things were looking really good offensively, and the defense was starting to come around. And yeah, losing to Dallas is not good. I'm waiting for the Andy Dalton is better than Dak Prescott truthers to come back out, right? So they were in hibernation for about a month when he was concussed and had COVID and everything else. I'm waiting for those people to come back. If they win Thursday, I think that'll really start to happen. But it's a crowded NFC wildcard race, Ryan. Tampa Bay's a lock. I think LA, if they win tonight, I think they're a lock as well. And then obviously Arizona, I think, is just better than Chicago and Minnesota. So I think their rough start really hurt their cause. And as a result, it's just too much to climb. And there's very little margin for error. But that's a really rough loss to the Cowboys. By the way, the
Breaking.
Cowboys are 15th overall in the NFC, Ryan. And if they win Thursday, they're going to jump up to fourth.
Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm.
That's just how this season is going.
Breaking NFL news, by the way, the Ravens have had multiple positive tests for COVID and their facility has been shut down. Normally, that would, there would be a chance that they could play, but they're scheduled for the Thanksgiving game on Thursday night. So that'll be something to watch because that's only 3 days from now. So I don't know. Maybe we won't have a night game for Thanksgiving. We'll wait to see. Final game of the day was Kansas City and Las Vegas. And this was another great game. So you recall that the Raiders gave the Chiefs a lot to handle earlier in the season. And now, once again, it looked like the Raiders might be in position for the upset. They got a touchdown from Jason Witten, who you texted in the group chat. I was thinking this a little earlier in the week. I forgot that Jason Witten was in the league, but he caught that touchdown pass with 1 minute and 43 seconds to go. But as any NFL fan knows, if you give Patrick Mahomes the ball back with any amount of time left on the clock in the fourth quarter, he's going to drive his team down the field and win. And that's exactly what he did. He found Travis Kelce with under 30 seconds to go, and the Chiefs won. So they improved to 9-1 on the season. They're the 2 seed right now behind the 10-0 Steelers. They're probably the team that I'm most confident in heading into the playoffs just because of the fact that they have Mahomes. I mean, every team this year has some type of flaw, but the Chiefs are the team that I feel the strongest about, that they can battle through it and get to the Super Bowl. But man, I think this was a good win for the Chiefs. They hadn't really played the most difficult opponents recently. They played Denver, the Jets, and Carolina. And I mean, they were lucky to get out of Carolina with a win, but this was a good win against a divisional opponent that knocked them off earlier in the season. And now it sets up a really intriguing late Sunday afternoon game next week when Kansas City travels to Tampa Bay.
Yeah, I agree. I like Kansas City a lot. I think having Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, Eric Bieniemy, that whole combination, and then all the weapons they have, you can never count them out of any game. I think I saw a tweet last night. Eagles fans really did not appreciate Andy Reid and everything he did in some ways, comparing him to what he's done now. I don't know if you agree, but I mean, that guy's done wonders for multiple franchises in his career. I mean, he's one of, in my opinion, the better coaches in NFL history. So to give him the shout out there, Ryan, I think, unless you were saving this for last, we missed the fraud Packers. We missed talking about the fraudulent Green Bay.
I missed that
Packers.
Game. Yeah. So yeah, the Green Bay Packers. I was shocked that, I mean, I'm trying to think about how I want to go at this game, and then this will be the last game we talk about. The Colts are starting to come around at the right time. I'm starting to become more confident in the Colts to maybe be a surprise team in the AFC that makes a run. They have a great kicker who wears the specs. You got to respect the specs. Rodrigo Blankenship. But yeah, Matt, this Packers team, I've said it for the past few weeks. I'm not really sold on them. I think they have some issues, and I know that they only lost by a field goal. But every team in the NFC has flaws at some point. It's hard to be confident in any of these teams. I don't think I can be confident in Green Bay. I mean, they have pieces on offense. They have pieces on defense. They have who I think to be is a solid head coach, but just something about this team, it doesn't scream to me title contender. I mean, they don't. The pass rush, I think, is a little bit of a question mark. It it almost seems like they have trouble battling adversity at times, and I don't know if that's fair to say, but I'm not confident in the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, I'm close to, I'm not, I know I said fraud Packers. I don't know if I'm ready to call them total frauds, but they're definitely approaching the F word, Ryan. They were up by 2 touchdowns in that game. They were up 28-14. And for whatever reason, and I get the Colts have one of the better defenses in the league, but to only score 3 points the entire second half in overtime after scoring 28 in the first half is a little concerning in some ways. Obviously, well, I can't even make the excuse that Rogers doesn't have a lot of weapons around him because they got Allen Lazard back, right? You have Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones is healthy, you have Jamal Williams there too, Robert Tunyon's healthy. I mean, this is probably the fullest the slate can get in terms of offensive weapons. So I don't know if it's a defensive thing. I don't. I think it might be some, as you said, some intrinsic other thing that isn't, a roster issue, right? I don't know, and I don't know if our resident Packers fans on our team can help us out, but like, it's 7-3. 7-3 is obviously a really good record, but when you're up by 2 touchdowns on the road at halftime with a Hall of Fame quarterback and a really good head coach, I would expect you to win that game. Tom Brady and Bill Belichick would have won that game. Peyton Manning and whoever his coach was would have won that game because he had multiple ones. Like, you know what I'm saying here? Like, those guys would have won that game. And I'm not saying Aaron Rodgers, it's his fault, because I don't think it is. I think, the turnover from Valdez-Scantling was bad. I think that I don't know what it is. It's not Rodgers' fault. It's like a whole 53-man thing.
There's a very real possibility that if they don't get the first round bye, they might lose wild card weekend depending on the matchup. And I think that not having the first round bye for the top 2 seeds, the Packers might get hurt more than anybody else. It's just I'm not confident in this team. I mean, like, if they fall, they're not going to fall below 3, obviously, unless Chicago goes on a major run. But right now, they would be slated to play Arizona. I think that game might present some issues for Green Bay, especially on the defensive end. Maybe they play Los Angeles and Sean McVay and Jared Goff. I think that could be a close competitive game that the Packers could theoretically lose. If Tampa Bay somehow falls to 6, I would definitely take Tom in that matchup in Tampa Bay and Bruce Arians. So if you're Green Bay, you got to fight like hell to get the number 1 seed, because you do not. I would not want to be the 2 seed in the NFC this year. I mean,
Yeah,
they could maybe even play Seattle if things keep going downhill. There's not a lot of matchups as a Packers fan I would feel confident about if they have to be the 2 seed on Wild Card weekend.
Yeah, it's just very hard to pinpoint. And they've been like this, when you and I used to do a radio show at school, they were kind of in this same boat here. You don't know what to really make of the Packers. Obviously, our friend of the show, Nick Halper, was very anti-Green Bay for a long time. You and I were kind of in the middle, but like, there's no, in my opinion, there's no, and I'm sorry if I compare it to New England when Tom and Bill were together, but like, it's kind of a similar script. I'm not comparing Matt LaFleur to Bill Belichick, but you have a capable head coach, a Hall of Fame quarterback, a full slate of weapons, a defense that has held its own for the most part. Especially against the team in Indianapolis that for a while we didn't really we thought Indy was what Green Bay is now, right? And now, as you said, the Colts are really starting to come into form. I think, despite their loss to Baltimore a couple weeks ago, I thought they played well in that game too. Even ever since the Cincinnati game when they beat a really good Joe Burrow-led team down the stretch, they've just looked better. So teams, I think, that are in 2 different directions in terms of confidence level. But Yeah, we really like the Colts as well, Ryan. But
So that
Joe and Billy gotta keep watch on their Green Bay Packers. That's what
and
I
I'm
gotta
not
say
I'm not
about that.
trying to start anything. I know they're going to throttle the Eagles when they play them in a few weeks, but just if I'm a Packers fan, I'd be a little concerned heading into January. They're going to make the playoffs. I don't know what they're going to do when they get there. So that was talking football. And now we're going to move on at the 50-minute mark to college basketball. So, as I said, we have the de facto college basketball expert uh, on the line here. And so I'm going to ask you how you'd like to go about this. Would you like to give your thoughts on conference by conference? Would you like to talk about certain teams? How would you like to go about this?
We could do whatever you want, Ryan. I got the preview up. We could do whatever. I will say to start out, anyone who's expecting a regular season of college, like a normal college basketball season, you're not going to get it. Um, you have to go in, tamper your expectations, be happy with what you can get. There will be a lot of canceled games, just like there were in the Major League Baseball season. The NFL's had to move stuff around. It's how other leagues are going to be. Major League Soccer's done the same thing. It's just how it's going to be. The people are saying that it's not going to really get that far, and they're going to have to shut everything down. I don't think that's going to happen. But this season, just for everyone to start out, don't expect what a normal season would bring. That's what I have to say to start out with it.
All right. So with that in mind, you know what? Why not? Let's go through the conferences now. As Matt said, there, or I should say, as he alluded to, there might be a scenario where some of these conferences we talk about, mainly the lower ones, maybe don't play. I mean, the Ivy League already opted out. There are a couple teams in the MEAC that opted out, so there's a chance that some of these teams do not play. But still, it's good to talk about them. I mean, if for nothing else, the kids have worked hard, so they deserve to get some recognition at the very least. So we'll just go in order. By the time you're listening to this episode, um, you'll know that there's a big college basketball preview that was put together by Matt on our website, bestavailableplayer.com. It's right at the top of our posts. It's the most recent one. You can't miss it. Just brings you to a nice little PDF link. You just click it. You can read this very good preview that's full of all the information you need. So if college basketball season has snuck up on you this year, like I'm sure a lot of sports have for a lot of people, this will get you ready for everything that you need to know heading into the 2020-2021 season. So with that said, let's just go in alphabetical order. That seems to be easiest. And we'll start with the America East. Now, Matt, you like Vermont a lot, but you said that this conference is wide open and that a lot of different teams could surprise, mainly because Vermont lost Anthony Lamb, who was a two-time player of the year. So let's go through this conference a little bit. We have kind of a local connection to this conference because there's NJIT in there that we're both huge fans of. But yeah, take us through the America East for this season.
So Anthony Lamb was really good. And Vermont has been the team. Anyone who has kind of followed just casually, Vermont has usually been the team at the America East. They kind of took over for Albany, who kind of had a nice run, who kind of tailed off right when you came to Monmouth, Ryan. That's kind of when they kind of faltered off a little bit. UMBC, if anyone remembers them, they were the team that beat Virginia a couple years ago. They're going to be really solid. Ryan Odom has done a really good job of keeping talent there. They have 4 starters coming back. If there's any team that I think could beat Vermont and make it to the NCAA tournament, it would be the Terriers. Another team that I like that a lot of people don't is New Hampshire, a team that has been really bad for a long time. They have a lot of good options. They're very deep. I would argue they're the deepest team in the America East. Stony Brook, another team that's kind of been hanging around in an America East power for a while. They have a lot of new guys coming into the program, though. Those I would say are the 4 teams that you would see battling it out. NJIT has been hopping conferences for the past decade. Ryan, I think for a while they so they were in the NEC, I believe. No, they were in the Atlantic Sun. They've been hopping all over the place. They're in the Atlantic Sun, and then before that, there was another conference they were in that just did not apply to their geographical location at all. And then before that, they were probably an independent. But Zach Cooks is really good. They have a guy, Soleimane Diakite. We're going to try and there's no pronunciation guides yet. Obviously, there's no game notes, so I'm just going in straight on these names. But Diakite is really long, has a lot of capable options in terms of offensive output. Antonio Brinson, another guy I like. So they can make a decent jump, but I would say the America East is a lot better competition than the Atlantic Sun. So yeah, I mean, overall, those are probably the top 4 teams. I would still take Vermont if I had to, make a decision now, but I really want to see them play over the next couple of weeks, and then that prediction might change.
So I think this is a question that I'm going to ask you for each conference. So in the NBA, people like to say that they have their league pass teams that they might not be a fan of, but they like watching them. So that's why they get league pass. So which teams in the America East, you can name as many as you want. You can name only one if you want. Which team should people follow this season?
New Hampshire, 100% New Hampshire. They're really deep, really capable on the offensive side of the ball, could score a lot. They have a lot of potential, especially for a team that really no one watches because they just haven't been this good in a little while. I would say them and Stony Brook. The Vermont, you're going to see them a lot, but I would say New Hampshire and Stony Brook are the 2 teams to keep an eye on that can maybe make a jump.
So that was the America East. So now we're going to go to the American Athletic, a conference that has some intriguing teams as well. I've always kind of I need to preface anything I say. I'm a casual college basketball fan that does not know as much as the guy that is talking more in depth, but I've always kind of liked Houston. I usually pick them in the tournament each year. It seems like they could, as long as the season goes according to plan, they could put everything together. But there's also some other good teams, obviously, in the American Athletic. Matt, one lost some multiple key guys in the recent draft, but they still have talent there as well. And I'm sure you'll go into that. But another local connection in this conference with Temple, and former NBA player Aaron McKee will be the coach there. But this is kind of an intriguing conference. So let's go through that a little bit.
Yeah, you mentioned Houston. Kelvin Sampson is one of the best coaches in the country. If you're looking for a team any year in the NCAA tournament, Houston is a very good selection to make a pretty decent run. They lost Nate Hinton, but they're still one of the better teams overall in terms of guard play. I know you and I have mentioned it before when you were looking this over. Their defense was one of the best in the whole entire nation last year. They're basically the shoe-in as of now. Talked about the team that had a lot of NBA talent. Obviously, Memphis lost not only James Wiseman, but Precious Achiuwa. Wiseman only played a couple games last year, but I still couple him in there. So this team, I think, could still be competitive. They got Musa Cisse coming in. He's basically James Wiseman in terms of his size and what he could do. They were, again, another good defensive team. We talked about what Houston did. They were second in the nation in adjusted defensive efficiency. That number as a KenPom metric. So Memphis last year, all the hype was around them, obviously with Achiuwa, with Wiseman, with Penny Hardaway there. That was going to be the year they kind of went back to what they were with Calipari and Derrick Rose back in 2008. That obviously didn't happen. The whole thing with Wiseman, he ended up leaving. They still were a good team though. And they were still a team that I would have been semi-confident in had an NCAA tournament be played. So I really like them this year too. I think Penny Hardaway is a fantastic coach. You look at other teams like SMU, they'll be decent. Cincinnati will be decent. I would have been a little bit higher on Wichita State had, everything kind of, if Greg Marshall didn't like assault people, obviously that story came out. He basically hit players and abused them verbally, physically. He's gone now. They had a talented UConn transfer come in, Tariq Gilbert, who I got to see a couple years ago when Monmouth played UConn. They have talented players, but again, changing a coach a week before the season starts, on top of all the implications that came from that investigation, I'm not really sure what's going to happen with that program, but they have the talent if everything kind of comes together. Other than that, a team, Ryan, that I really would have been high on had Colin Smith not had to opt out of the season would be UCF. I think Johnny Dawkins he's built a really good program there, but obviously Smith was the go-getter there, and due to health concerns, he had to back out of the season. They get CJ Walker in from VCU, a guy in Sean Mobley from CJ Walker from Oregon, VCU, a guy in Sean Mobley. They still have depth. I could see them jumping a couple teams, but if they had Colin Smith, I would have went out on a limb and said they would have been a top tier contender in this league. And then you get to some teams below. You talk about teams, not necessarily league pass teams, Ryan, but teams that, you could keep an eye on. South Florida and East Carolina are two teams that I think are trending in the right direction. So, and then your guy, Aaron McKee, former Sixer at Temple, it's going to take a while for him to build up that program. So Houston, Memphis, probably going to be the only two teams coming out of this conference come March.
You brought up a good point, I thought, with UCF. I think with everything that's gone on in the past year or so, people forget that this UCF team was very close to knocking off Duke in the second round back in 2019 in the tournament. And that was the Taco Fall team, if I remember correctly. So yeah, I think I agree with you. They should be a fun team to watch. But yeah, I'm excited to see how things go. And of course, as a Philadelphia, someone close to Philadelphia, I'm always interested to see how those teams look. So I'll definitely keep tabs on Temple just to see if they can maybe improve. I've always liked McKee. I mean, he used to be not only a player, but he was an assistant coach for us under Doug Collins. So I've always followed his career path. I'm interested to see what he can do there with Temple. The A10 is kind of a fun conference, the Atlantic 10. These are a lot of these teams, whenever they make the tournament, I always like to pick them to just advance to the second round or maybe the Sweet 16. I've done that in the past for St. Louis. I would have done it for Dayton. I've done it for Rhode Island, VCU, Davidson. So a lot of teams in this conference people have probably heard of for one reason or another. So Matt, you saying your preview that this will likely be one of the most exciting conferences to watch because it has a lot of good teams that are separated by very little. And I mean, going through when I read your preview, I agree. It seems like this will be a really fun conference to keep tabs on throughout the entire season.
Well, the A10 probably would have been a 3 or 4 team league in the NCAA tournament last year. They were stacked. It was a league that I watched a lot of last season, obviously because of what Obi Toppin did at Dayton. Anthony Grant's done a really good job building that program up, and they'll still be good this year too. If people have seen the mid-major article that I wrote, I mean, technically this conference is a mid-major conference, but it's really kind of trending towards a more power high major conference than it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I mean, Ryan, even if you go back further than the teams you mentioned, I mean, LaSalle had that Sweet 16 run when we were in high school. St. Joe's has had some good teams too. Those teams aren't going to really factor in this year. I love Richmond. I love St. Louis, and I love St. Bonaventure. If I could go on farther on that article, I would have added St. Bonaventure to that list too. All three of those teams, I think, can be NCAA tournament teams. Do I think the committee is going to let all three in? Probably not. But I think any of those three could win a conference outright. I mean, Richmond, I know I spent a lot of time on these teams in the articles, so go check that out if you want more. But Richmond has guys like Jacob Gilliard, Blake Francis. I mean, they're stacked. St. Louis is just as stacked with so much depth. A team that really hasn't been statistically good in a very long time in the A10. They've kind of finally put it together, and this is kind of like the lightning in a bottle season for them because their metrics have been very poor for a long time, but those three teams are good. Dayton will be a team to still watch. I mean, I could look at this roster, this projections, and these teams right now, and I could say out of the 14 teams, 10 of them will be very competitive this season. I like Duquesne a lot. Friend of the show, best available player member, Pat Duffy, Duquesne alum. His Dukes are going to be a really good team. I mean, the whole thing, and we obviously followed that situation close too with their head coach hiring of Keith Denbrough, and he has kind of built a really good team. They went 21-9 last year. Haven't made the tournament since '77. I think they're maybe a year away. They have 4 returning guys who averaged double figures last year. So league pass team from this league is Duquesne. They're going to kind of shoot up a little bit, but you can't go wrong with any Atlantic 10 game, Ryan. I mean, this conference is really good. I know I always, excuse me, get made fun of because I watch these lower tier conferences, but this is more so a high major conference than a lot of them out there. So I recommend anyone who wants to get into college hoops this year. Obviously, we have a month before the NBA starts. So if you need your basketball fix, I recommend the A10. It's a lot of good teams.
So moving from the A10 to one of the conferences that everyone will probably be familiar with just based on the teams, the ACC. Of course, you have Virginia, Duke, North Carolina, but there's some other intriguing teams in this conference as well. I mean, Matt, I know you'll go into Florida State a little bit. They lost some talent in the draft, but they still have pieces there that should make the team good. And further down the list, there's intrigue all throughout. I would say. I mean, this should be an exciting conference to watch too.
Yeah, so if you go in terms of teams I think can make the tournament, I think they'll go 7 deep this year. Virginia, Duke, UNC, I think is going to get back in it. Off year last year, kind of a fluke year. You bring back one of the better players in the country in Garrison Brooks, and a lot of depth around them in terms of their incoming class. They'll get back to relevancy. Florida State, I've been very vocal with you, Ryan, and in our group chat too. Their guys, whenever they have talented players coming out, I'm always very high on them because they're all over 6'5". They all have a wingspan close to 7 feet, and they're all interchangeable. They could play multiple positions. They could score they could go 12 deep any night for the past 5 years. And any of those 12 guys on any of those rosters could go for 20 at any given time. That's how good these guys are. Leonard Hamilton has done such a good job building the program up. If you look at their NBA presence, G League, NBA, whatever, overseas, wherever they're playing, there's a lot of Florida State guys still playing. So they are a dark horse team. I don't even know if I'd consider them a dark horse team anymore, but a team that could sneak in and get the regular season title or the postseason title. But Virginia, a team that you mentioned, should be the favorite. I mean, you bring in Sam Hauser, that should fix a little bit of the offensive production. Obviously, the pack line is going to hold teams to 50 points a game. So they'll kind of be a second half team of the season. Don't look for them early on to be spectacular. They will kind of fall down the pole and then come back up. That's what they usually do. But yeah, the ACC, if you look for a team that can maybe sneak in, Georgia Tech, NC State, 2 teams, everyone's really high on Georgia Tech. Josh Pastner we've been kind of waiting for him to put it together at Georgia Tech, and this year might be the year, but yeah, it's another good year for the ACC. A couple of years ago, it was a very bleak year for the ACC, but they've kind of reloaded on their depth and started to get back into things.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to talk about it. And of course, a conference like this, a lot of these games will obviously be on TV stations that a lot of people get. So if you see a game on, you should definitely check it out. Should be a good time. The Atlantic Sun. So we talked about the Atlantic Sun earlier with NJIT, who used to be a member of the conference, but they are no longer part of it. There are now 9 teams in the Atlantic Sun. And I mean, you start off your preview for this conference by saying that it's a smaller, lesser known conference, but that shouldn't take away from the fact that there's some talented teams here in the A Sun. I know that you really seem to like Lipscomb and Stetson, but there's a lot of intrigue here too. I mean, even though it's a smaller conference, I think that some of these games will be really fun to watch.
Yeah, if you want high scoring affairs, this is the conference to go. I like Lipscomb, as you said. I mean, any team that's going to come out of the Atlantic Sun is going to be a high scoring team, play at a blistering pace. Stetson, a team that beat our alma mater last year, Ryan, and really kind of took it to them for a while. They are a team that are going to kind of step onto the scene this year. A lot of people think you have the freshman of the year coming back, Rob Perry, a guy who I think is going to help kind of move this program continually in the right direction. They're the only team in the league to have all five starters back. They haven't had a winning record since 2001. So I think this year could be the year for them. Liberty, I'm never going to count out them. You look at in terms of NBA talent they've been able to put out. I mean, they've put out some nice guys. A couple of years ago, I think they stole a game in the NCAA tournament as well. They're a really solid team. I really like their head coach. So, and for those who don't know this conference, this is Florida Gulf Coast Conference. Back when we were in high school, they had a Sweet 16 run, the Dunk City team. But I would say Lipscomb's the favorite, but I wouldn't be surprised in 4 months if Stetson or Liberty took that over.
Yeah, I agree. And now moving on from this conference with teams that people should get to know, with a conference that has teams that people probably already know of. It's the Big 12. And this is, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to see one of these teams play soon. And that was Baylor. But Matt, this conference has a lot of talent. This is another fun conference to watch each and every year. So I am really excited personally to watch Oklahoma State just because of Cade Cunningham. But of course, there's other talented teams in the Big 12 as well that people should keep an eye on.
Yeah, I think that the Big 12 is a lot top heavy this year. You look at Baylor, Kansas, Texas Tech. I mean, a lot of these teams, you can even go down to 5 with Texas and West Virginia that can be Sweet 16 teams. Oklahoma, I'll throw them in there for the NCAA tournament. Obviously, Oklahoma State's going to have the number one prospect for next year's NBA draft in Cade Cunningham, but they can't play in the postseason. In terms of teams that I think could win the whole thing, I'm going to go with Baylor. I really like what they have to offer. Last year, they basically returned this same team that pretty much ran through the Big 12, ran through the regular season. If you're looking for national title contenders, Baylor is probably one of, if not the best. They came out as number 2 in the preseason poll. I really think they should have been number 1. I think they're better than Gonzaga in almost every right. We're going to see them play each other, COVID prevailing at some point in a couple weeks. So that should be a real indicator of who's the better team. But yeah, I mean, Baylor, Kansas, in terms of teams that aren't towards the top, I really like West Virginia. Bob Huggins has done a really good job with a young team last year. They're one of the younger teams in the country, and they managed to get up to 10 nationally in terms of a lot of metrics in KenPom. But I mean, Big 12 will be exciting. Again, COVID prevailing, you should get a lot of good contests within that conference.
Yeah, absolutely. And going from the Big 12 to another conference with big in the name, the Big East. Now, this is a conference that we have some obvious regional connections to because of the fact that we live in South Jersey, Villanova, a Philadelphia school, Seton Hall, a New Jersey school that we saw play in person when Monmouth traveled to the Prudential Center a few years back. You have DePaul, which is where one of the guards that we watched for years at Monmouth, Ray Salnave, decided to transfer over the offseason. I've always enjoyed watching this conference. I don't know why, but it's just always, this is probably the conference that's my go-to each and every year. I think that the games are really entertaining. So take us through this conference. Obviously, Villanova is going to be the favorite, but there's a lot of other good teams as well.
Yeah, Villanova could very well be better than they were last year. They're another team that if you're looking for a contender in March, go with the Wildcats. I mean, Colin Gillespie, uh, Jeremiah Robinson Earl, another guy who is really solid coming back. Not having Sadiq Bey is going to be really tough. They do have a transfer from Tulane coming in, who's going to be really good for them. They have four guys back who average double figures. Um, they're one of the better teams in the Big East since they kind of rebooted back in 2013. I really like them, but a team that is going to kind of surprise a lot of people is Creighton. They lost a guy to the NBA draft, Tyshawn Alexander, but they still are really good, especially in the front court. I really like what they could do with their size. So Creighton there, and obviously the big story this year in the Big East, UConn's back after a little date in the American Athletic. They're back where they belong in the Big East with a pretty solid team. I think a lot of people are kind of buying into the hype a little too much, but I think they'll still be one of the better teams in this conference. They also benefit from the fact that Seton Hall lost a couple key pieces along with Xavier, Marquette. A lot of these other teams kind of took steps back. Butler took a step back. So I think they're coming in at the right time. Seton Hall, I still think, can make the postseason. A guy that you and I got to see, Takal Molson, came over from Canisius. Bryce Aiken from Harvard, a name that should be familiar to a lot of college basketball fans. They have him either. But without Miles Powell, without Quincy McKnight, who the hell knows what they're going to be this year? But I see them going 5 deep, maybe 6, depending on what Xavier does. But I really like Villanova and Creighton. UConn, don't buy into the hype just yet, but they should be a very good team. A lot of the other teams regressed. I don't like, a lot of the Monmouth fan bases kind of, criticize Ray Salnave's move to DePaul. DePaul, they could steal a couple games. They have some talented players. Charlie Moore, who used to play at Cal, I think he was a Kentucky guy at one point too. They have a really good backcourt, but I think the issue is just that, the stakes are kind of against them in this conference to move up very far. But in terms of getting good opportunities, Soundwave's going to have a lot of good, tests in the Big East with the talented guard alongside him and Charlie Moore, who should give him a lot of shots. So there'll be, every team in this conference is going to be exciting, but stick to the teams in the top more so in this conference than in other leagues.
And now moving on the map from the East Coast up to the North and the Northwest, it's the Big Sky. Now this conference seems to be kind of a 2-team race, but the other teams below these 2 teams that I'm sure you're going to talk about, they have some pieces there, and you should also watch for those teams. Maybe if not this year, then in the future.
Yeah, to keep this one short, just take Eastern Washington until they prove otherwise. They bring back a lot of really good pieces. You have Jacob Davidson there, Kim Aiken Jr., another guy who can be in the running for Big Sky Player of the Year. They play at a blistering pace. They score a lot. They get a lot of high quality shots. They're the safest bet. They're one of the safer bets in terms of any teams to win a conference. In terms of all 32, I guess 31 this year. Montana could give them a little bit of a run. Northern Colorado is probably a year or two away, but in terms of this season, Eastern Washington is a team that can really, really just kind of run through this conference. Number one, depending on their matchup in March, can maybe steal a game.
And another conference, Matt, with big in the name, the Big South, the conference that we're familiar with from a football perspective, but their college basketball conference should be fun to watch too. There's some solid teams, I would say. I'm admittedly not too familiar with most of the teams in this conference in terms of basketball, other than the team that you have in number 1, which is Winthrop. But it seems like you've named a lot of players in this preview that people should look out for. So it seems like even if Winthrop does end up finishing at the top, there's other reasons to watch the Big South.
Yeah, I like UNC Asheville a lot this year. They had a really crappy season a couple years ago, but they won 15 games last year. Devon Baker's a really good player. They have their entire starting five back. Any team that could kind of sneak in there, probably going to be them. USC Upstate, another team that should be pretty solid. The Big South, known more for its football, but in basketball, has produced some solid players. Obviously, one of the best scorers in NCAA history, Chris Clemens, came out of Campbell. They're not going to be too much of a factor this year, but you mentioned Winthrop. You mentioned all these other teams at the top. Whatever team you're going to get out of the Big South will be all right. Probably going to end up playing in the play-in game. But I could see 3 or 4 teams making a decent run. If you're looking for, in terms of just pure player perspectives, Philandris Fleming out of Charleston Southern, probably player of the year front runner in the Big South. He's probably the league pass player to watch out of this league.
All right, that sounds good. So I'm gonna try to get into watching college basketball this year. So I'm sure this is a conference that I'll end up watching at some point. Just put a game on in the background and just kind of keep up with it. I can definitely see myself watching some of these teams. Big Ten, going back into the major conferences. They were really good a year ago, Matt. And so now we enter the 2020-2021 season. There's a lot of intrigue here with the Big Ten, a lot of exciting teams that we should watch. The local connection in this for us is probably Rutgers, who looked like they were probably going to make the tournament a year ago. And then, unfortunately, pandemic, but they'll have another chance this year, it seems like.
Yeah, I almost wrote an article about the Big Ten alone. I mean, this is a conference that could realistically get up to 10 teams or even more in the NCAA tournament. They benefited from a lot of players coming back and opting out of the NBA draft. Luka Garza, probably the best player in the country at Iowa. They bring back their entire starting five, along with another guy who was in their starting five who got hurt. They're one of the most efficient offenses in the entire country. Not only Iowa, you have Wisconsin, who brought back 6 seniors from last year's squad, basically their entire production and their rotation. They have depth, balance. They're going to be a heavyweight, another top 10 team. And the third top 10 team in the country to come out of the Big Ten is Illinois. I wrote an article back in September or August or whatever about this Illini squad. Ayo Dosunmu, Kofi Coburn, really good duo for them. Brad Underwood's done a good job recruiting to this team as well to kind of bring them back into a powerhouse in this league. Those are just in the top 10. They have 6 or 7 teams in the top 30 of the nation. Michigan State will be really solid this year. What they need to bank on this year is health, obviously, because you have Josh Langford, who's going to come back, who's seemingly been there forever. And that's not necessarily his choice. He's just been set back by so many injuries. So you hope for him, he's going to be able to get on the court this year. He's a really talented player. You really can't go wrong, Ryan, with 12 of the 14 teams in the Big 12. I can make a realistic, or Big 12, the Big 10. I can make a realistic case for definitely 11 of these teams to make the NCAA tournament. And then Penn State's kind of the wild card. Rutgers, you mentioned Rutgers. They brought back 7 of their 8 best players. So the COVID shutdown obviously prevented a lot of droughts and historic seasons from happening, right, Ryan? But this is a program that has been maligned for years, struggled in the Big East, struggled in the Big Ten. People criticized the move to come to the Big Ten. And last year, they looked like they were on their way to the NCAA tournament for the first time since the early 90s. And their defense was one of the best, not only in the Big Ten, but in the country. They were really exciting. The rack obviously was filled every night. Not going to happen this year, but so much excitement there with that program, and I think rightfully so. Then you go down the list further, Ohio State, Indiana. I'm not the biggest fan of Archie Miller in Indiana. I guess that's kind of just, there's a lot of reasons for that. I'm not the hugest fan of them, but they should be an NCAA tournament team. Purdue and Michigan, I think, can sneak in. Maryland, I can make the case for. Minnesota, I think, could realistically. So if you look on the preview, I have Minnesota at 11. I can make the case they could finish ninth, depending on how things shake out. But yeah, the Big Ten, Ryan, if you're looking for just on Wednesday or any day, the Big Ten network, just put it on and leave it on because they're some of the best teams in the country. 3 in the top 10 alone.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up Rutgers. I mean, for the longest time, the only reason that they got any recognition, it was negative because of what I think it was Mike Rice Jr. He was verbally and physically abusing the players that he had. So that was really the only reason they were in the national spotlight to begin with. But now it seems like they're finally turning things around, and I'm excited to watch them. I mean, I had a couple friends that went to Rutgers for college. I know they're excited for the season too. So I hope that they make the tournament. I think that would obviously be a great thing for that school, and I'm definitely gonna watch closely to see if they can get in this year. But it seems like, health permitting, they should be able to. Um, the final conference with big in the name, the Big West. So we've gone all over the map, and now we're into the Big West. Uh, the Big West, you make the point of it in your preview in the little introduction paragraph. This team has produced, or this conference has produced some teams that have kind of surprised in the NCAA tournament. And, as long as there's a tournament this year, it seems like that could maybe happen again with some of the teams that we have here at the top.
Yeah, so those teams in the past, if anyone remembers, the Long Beach State years, a couple of years when we were in high school, then they had a couple of teams when we were in college as well. Hawaii had a nice run our freshman year of college. If you're looking for a League Pass team, Ryan, League Pass alert, UC Santa Barbara, a team that I think can realistically make an impression on this league. UC Irvine is going to be the favorite. The Anteaters, a lot of good team names in this conference as well. The Anteaters should be the favorite. They have a really good player, Caldwell, who I really enjoy watching play. They have depth, they have size, they have everything they need. But if you're looking for a team to follow, it's UC Santa Barbara. I mean, here's another, the Gauchos, right? Keeping on a nice team name streak. They're, I think, deeper than UC Irvine. I think they have a lot of really good players, a lot of really good guards. I really think, and they almost made the mid-major article list, but obviously I didn't want to take them over Irvine. But Santa Barbara is going to be the team to keep an eye on. I really, really, really like what they did over the past couple of years to kind of build this team up. The Monmouth connection for us, everyone remembers a couple of years ago, Monmouth played Cal State Fullerton at the Myrtle Beach Invitational. That did not end well for our Hawks, Ryan, but it shows how much talent this program has produced. They're going to kind of fall down a little bit in the preseason poll and everything else. But yeah, UC Irvine, UC Santa Barbara, you're not going to go wrong with either to watch this season. So everyone's going to kind of look at me and say, well, why would I want to watch a Big West game at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night? If you get UC Irvine and UC Santa Barbara, that's going to be one of the better games you're going to see on that night slate.
Something better than late night college athletics. I will say that. I mean, everyone loves Pac-12 after dark. Well, what about Big West after dark? The way you're describing it sounds like that could be a fun time as well. I mean, what else are you doing at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night?
Not watching much. Disney movies for Glenn.
That's true. We will get into that. Don't worry, Glenn. That's a coming. The Colonial Athletic Conference. Now, this conference should be fun to follow, Matt, because as you said, a lot of these teams are pretty close in terms of talent level. So this should be a competitive conference, which should be appealing to a lot of people.
Yeah, so if you look at all the different bracket experts, Winardi has Northeastern winning this. Andy Katz is Hofstra winning this. I think Drexel could win this. I have Hofstra as the number one team just as the default, but I really like Drexel. They have a player named Cam Winter, who I think is the best player in the conference. Delaware, another team you can't count out. Two local connections there for you, Ryan. Delaware has built a really solid program. Nate Darling obviously left for the NBA draft. If he came back, this team would be the hands down favorite in the league. But Yeah, you said it. A lot of these teams could realistically make a case. I have Northeastern 6. Lenardi has them 1. So I could see any scenario working out here. You can't go wrong with watching a lot of these teams play. Uh, Charleston's going to be pretty decent. They had a guy drafted the other night, Grant Riller. There we go. One of the best scorers ever in the Colonial. I think he went to Charlotte, I want to say. So I think they kept him close. But there's been some good players who come out of this conference. There are other guys in the NBA now. Justin Wright Foreman, who came from Hofstra. So another good mid-major conference to kind of keep an eye on.
And now moving on from the Colonial to Conference USA. In this conference right now, with your conference projections, you have Western Kentucky number 1, North Texas is number 2. North Texas was the team that went 14-4 in the conference a season ago. Western Kentucky was right there at 13-5. Louisiana Tech also went 13-5. So it seems like those 3 teams should put on a bit of a show this year, and then you also have Marshall up there in the top 4. But this should also be another fun kind of conference to keep an eye on in 2020 and 2021.
Yeah, this one has a lot of teams in it. I would say for this conference, keep an eye on the teams towards the top. Western Kentucky, we've been waiting for Rick Stansbury to kind of put this together. I mentioned this in the mid-major article, and Ryan, in a couple times that he's been there, he said the 15th ranked overall national recruiting class, and then another one at 29. He has a 5-star player that came in, I want to say our junior year, because I remember skipping out on a friend outing with you, Jill, and the whole crew, so I could watch Charles Bassey play at Western Kentucky. So that shows my college social life right there. Glenn would be number 1 on that list to make fun of me for it, that I would skip out on the outing with friends to go watch Western Kentucky play. They have a really good offense, 5-star player on the team, really good recruiting class. Everyone's back. I mean, this has to be the year for them. And if they make the NCAA tournament, Ryan, they're going to be one of the better teams, I think, in terms of built for postseason play. I could see a scenario where they're ranked at some point this season. I really can. They should run away with this conference theoretically, but North Texas is right there. You mentioned them, but what the Hilltoppers, this has to be a year for them, because if it's not this year, I don't know when it will be.
I'm excited to keep up with the top 4 teams that you mentioned, and even Charlotte to an extent. I'm excited to watch them this year as well. UTEP, I have a friend, best available player team member, David Austin Guest, that has some connections with UTEP, so I'll be sure to keep up with them and talk to him about it, see what he thinks is going on over there. The Horizon League. So we had Western Kentucky in Conference USA. We have Northern Kentucky here in the Horizon. So I'm sure that a lot of people will immediately recognize Robert Morris here in the Horizon League. They were in the Northeastern Conference, and now they are here. I remember my biggest memory of Robert Morris is the scare that they gave Villanova. I guess that would have been 10 years ago in the tournament, the game that went to overtime in the first round. So that was 10 years ago.
Were you, so we were in, I vividly remember that game too, because we were in, I guess, middle school at the time. And I forget what teacher I had. He put the game on the TV and we were just watching college basketball during the day. I'm pretty sure that was the year that game happened.
It might have been. Yeah, we would have been in 7th grade that year.
So Robert Morris, my fondest memory is when I used to be a Kentucky basketball fan, and when Kentucky got put in the NIT, and then because the NCAA tournament was at Rupp Arena, they had to go play at Robert Morris, and then they lost at Robert Morris to the worst team in the NIT, which was Robert Morris. No longer a Kentucky basketball fan. As a aspiring John Rothstein, one day I become neutral. But in this conference, Ryan, just take Wright State and move on. They were really good last year. They should be really good this year. They really kind of messed up by not winning the league championship last year in their conference title game. But that kind of got salvaged by the fact that there was no NCAA tournament, so everyone kind of forgot about it. Northern Kentucky, you mentioned them. They're really good too. They had a lot of roster turnover, though, so I'm kind of waiting to see on them. I've been high on that program for a while. Robert Morris should be good too. So those are 3 teams to keep an eye on. I like Detroit also. They had a guy that I saw back when he played at Syracuse, Torian Thompson, who's kind of bounced all over the place. He should make an impact there. So the Horizon League, it's kind of taken some steps back in recent years. Butler, if anyone's familiar with the Brad Stevens days, that's where Butler came from, was the Horizon League. So they've kind of taken a step back in that regard.
So unfortunately, we're going to skip over the Ivy League. They said that they were going to take their time to make a decision on the basketball season, and they eventually decided to cancel it. So unfortunately, we're going to skip over those teams. That was a conference that I became acquainted with over the past couple years because Monmouth played several of those teams during their non-conference slate. But unfortunately, they will not be competing this year. So we're going to actually, speaking of Monmouth, we're going to skip over to the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference, conference with 11 different teams. Now, as Monmouth alums, we're always going to root for their success. But right now, they should be competitive this year. But there are 2 teams in the conference that it would be smart to kind of put your faith behind a little more, and that is Siena and Iona. Hopefully this conference does play this year because I'm going to be excited to watch it. Of course, it's nice to not be associated with it anymore. I think I can kind of take more of an interest in it. But Matt, you say in your preview, 5 or 6 of these teams have a legitimate shot at the conference title, and I think I definitely agree with you.
Yeah, and the famous part of this league is that 1 through 11, anyone could finish anywhere. For the most part, you and I experienced it firsthand for a number of years. Just when you think you know what's going to happen, Nico Clara scores 27 points on a sprained ankle and takes that away. But it's a fun conference. I have gotten in debates at work over this in terms of where it kind of stands in the national world. It's put out some really good teams. Our beginning college years, it was really loaded with talent. Then it kind of took a little dip as a whole, as in terms of conference depth, and now it's kind of coming back up, right? And a lot of these teams are starting to become really deep. A lot of really good guard play in this conference, and I think in terms of you're looking for the team with the best backcourt, it's going to be Siena. Jalen Pickett, I think, is a really talented player. I think one of the better mid-major players in the country. Manny Camper coming back. He flirted with the NBA, decided to come back. Him coming back put them over the top for me. I think this is a team that, come March, I wouldn't really be surprised if they gave a team a run for their money. I really wouldn't. They have some really good newcomers coming in. I think they're really solid. Their head coach, Carmen Massarella, I really like him. I thought that was a really good hire for them. Iona, the whole big story there. Rick Pitino's back, just in case you haven't really heard yet. He came back from Greece. It was I call his little sabbatical overseas. Now he's back. Tim Kluse, incredible coach. He had to take a step out. And now that Rick Pitino's here in year 1, he brought in a lot of, his guys in terms of players. They have a lot of size, Ryan, which I think if you have effective size in this league, that'll win you a lot of games as well. I know I said guard play, but if you have effective size, and I say that very strongly, effective size, it'll win you some games. But if they're able to put in all 11 newcomers and have them come together, I could see them winning. Some people have them down as 4 or 5. I don't really agree with that just yet. People are really high on St. Peter's. I am as well. Monmouth, I have them above St. Peter's at 3. The one thing that I think is going to be something to keep an eye on, they're not really deep in the front court, Ryan. They're kind of thin in that regard. But again, I've said it before, good guard play wins you a lot of games in this league. That's how Iona did it. And then Monmouth did it with Justin Robinson, Juwan Hornbeek, Micah Seaborn. Jalen's more of like a 2 or a 3, but that's a debate for another time. But regardless, Monmouth has probably, you put Siena number 1, Monmouth is right there in terms of better backcourts in the league. So our Hawks can fight for it, Ryan. I think in order for them to really kind of compete with Siena, they're going to need to find that depth on the inside. They're a little bit young in that regard, which isn't always a bad thing in this league because Siena won a lot of games with young players before a couple of years ago. St. Peter's did it last year with one of the youngest teams in the country. So, yeah, I have 5 or 6 teams. And the other 2 teams, Canisius, Niagara, I could see Manhattan making a run, Fairfield making a run. Anyone can make a list, and I would say it could probably happen. Like that's just the parity of this league. Like it's just anyone could win any given night. It's the true any given Sunday of the NFL in this regard. Like you never know what's going to happen.
Well, Matt, they're not the only MAC when it comes to college conferences. There's also the Mid-American Conference. Of course, people know about the MAC and MACtion because of college football season each year, but they're an entertaining basketball conference as well. A lot of people will probably recognize Buffalo because of their relative success in the NCAA tournament the past 2 seasons. They made it as a 13 seed 2 years ago, and then they upset Arizona. That was the team with DeAndre Ayton, and they ended up losing to Kentucky in round number 2. Last year, they made it in as a 6 seed, and they won their first round matchup before losing to a good Texas Tech team. I say last year, I mean 2019. But you have them at 3 in your projections. You have a couple teams ahead of them. So take us through the Mid-American and how you see it playing out.
Yeah, a lot of people like Buffalo. I wouldn't be surprised if they won it. I went out on a limb here. I picked Bowling Green. Bowling Green has been a team. We talked about some other programs earlier. Haven't made the NCAA tournament since long before we were born. Justin Turner coming back, not Justin Turner, LA Dodger, Justin Turner, Bowling Green, Justin Turner. He came back, kind of surprised people because normally when you're a grad transfer, you're going to go to a high major school like a Kentucky, Duke, whatever, after you dominate for 4 years at a mid-major league. He came back to Bowling Green. In my opinion, when they returned the other guys to Daquan Plowden, Trey Diggs, they should be the favorite. I don't really agree with people not really having them high on their list. I really like them. Ball State, another good team. There should be some teams. I mean, Buffalo could realistically run away with it again like they have in the past. I could very well see Ball State or Akron doing it as well. So this will be a fun league. People, make fun of it, MACtion for football, but basketball, they've had some sneaky teams in the past. Akron, Ohio's had some good teams, more so when we were in high school. But yeah, I mean, don't really look at the bottom portion of this league because you're not going to find a lot of good teams, but the top 4 or 5 are exciting ones to watch.
Well, Matt, we have the MAC, we have the MAC, and now we have the MEAC, the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference. Now, a couple of these teams have opted out, but you have them towards the bottom of your conference projections anyway. Howard is probably going to be the team a lot of people follow because of the surprising news that the 5-star player, Makar Maker, committed there for the season. So Howard's probably going to get a lot of run nationally, but you have North Carolina Central number 1. But you said that regardless, there's going to be a lot of eyes on this conference and for good reason.
Yeah, and I think there will be in the coming years as well. There's a lot of 5-star recruits that are starting to eye up these programs in this conference. And this league for, I want to say 4 or 5 years has kind of been dominated by NC Central. And I think they, as you mentioned, they should be the favorite. Again, this year, CJ Kaiser is a really good player. Maker and Howard, a lot of people. So I kind of, you looked at a lot of different previews when making mine, and they weren't really this high in a lot of these predictions, which, I don't really understand. They bring back 4 starters, one of which was the rookie of the year in the MEAC last year, and Wayne Bristol Jr. Um, you bring in a 5-star talent. I think to crack the top tier of this conference is very difficult because the bottom is very bad. So to try and go from the bad to the top is a very difficult jump. But I think for a team, a program in Howard who has really struggled in basketball to try and become relevant, this year should be the year. I really like Norfolk State too. I worked with someone this summer who went to North Carolina A&T. I think they're a pretty decent team. So there are some good teams in here, and I think this league as a whole is going to start to kind of move up the ranks. I would say within the next decade, I would say, because that takes a long time. That's what the A10 did last decade. The MEAC could very well be that conference this time around. But the bottom, not so great. The top, some pretty cool teams to watch. Now, granted, any team that comes out of this conference is going to be a 16 seed and probably be in a play-in game, but some fun teams to watch. So, and Howard's going to be on national TV a couple times. I think they play Notre Dame, I think, or Georgetown or somebody. So you'll get a lot of opportunities to watch them play.
Now, for the Missouri Valley Conference, a lot of people are immediately going to recognize Loyola Chicago as the team that made a run to the Final Four a couple of years ago, but they shouldn't discount the other teams behind them. I mean, I know Northern Iowa, especially when it's come to the NCAA tournament, has had some exciting moments. So this should be a competitive conference to keep an eye on.
Yeah, the Missouri Valley Tournament, Arch Madness, playing their games in St. Louis. This is a conference that had two teams make the mid-major article of mine, Ryan. You mentioned the Ramblers and also Northern Iowa. I really like Bradley this year as well. They're a team that made the tournament a couple years ago, I believe. Indiana State should be good this year too. They like 30 or 40 other programs right now are dealing with some COVID stuff, but when they get on the court, they should be really fun to watch. So really 1 through 5 are pretty solid teams. The story last year was Missouri State. They bring in all these newcomers, a lot of talented D1 transfers, and they really fell flat. So the formula in this conference has been bringing in the class, building them up over 4 years. I love Northern Iowa. I love Loyola Chicago. You're going to get a chance to watch UNI, Ryan, right off the bat in the Bad Boy Mowers Crossover Classic in South Dakota. They play West Virginia at 2:00 on Wednesday. I highly recommend watching Northern Iowa play. Statistically, one of the best offenses in the country. Loyola Chicago should be really good too. I think both could make the NCAA tournament this year, depending on their non-conference slate. I think if Northern Iowa wins a couple games in South Dakota this week, but then loses in the conference tournament, I could realistically see them getting in as an at-large bid. So, yeah, they've produced a lot of fun moments. UNI, of course, beat Kansas all those years ago, and then had that buzzer beater over Texas or Texas A&M, right? Some Texas team when we were in college. So, a couple really fun teams to watch. When they meet up, those two teams, that'll be must-see TV.
Now, moving on to a conference that I've always enjoyed in multiple sports, the Mountain West. You have San Diego State at number 1. Boise State gets a lot of run because of their football team and their blue turf, but their basketball team has been pretty consistent as well. They haven't made the tournament recently. The last time they did was in 2015, but they've still been able to win games under Leon Rice, who's been a good head coach. And there's some other teams in this conference as well that people have recognized from over the years. So this should be another exciting conference that if you're trying to get into college basketball, maybe this is a conference you want to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and I think a lot of teams, or I would say San Diego State, everyone remembers what they did last year, just running the table through a great majority of the season. They had a really rough loss late in the season to UNLV that kind of knocked them back. They would have been probably a 1 seed in the tournament, Ryan. And they lose Malachi Flynn. They bring back a guy, Matt Mitchell, who I think is the best player in the conference, or at least one of them, if not Derek Alston on Boise State. But looking at these teams, I almost put Boise State in as an at-large, but probably just going to be the Aztecs and move on from there. But some teams are starting to rise. I like Colorado State, I like UNLV, like Utah State, but they lost a lot of really key pieces. Nemius Keita from Utah State, I think, is the best front court player at the mid-major level. I mean, you said it. They've had some really good games, really good teams, but this year should be San Diego State again. I would be very surprised if it wasn't the Aztecs or Boise State come March.
And now coming back to our region, the Northeast Conference. Now, we talked about Robert Morris a little earlier. They used to be in the Northeast Conference, and they ended their time in the NEC with a conference title. That was the first time that happened since 2015. So now I know you're a big fan of Fairleigh Dickinson, but there's other teams in this conference that might be fun to watch.
Yeah, St. Francis, New York should be good. I think that's a team on the Monmouth non-conference schedule. So for anyone that listens to this and is familiar with the Monmouth program, watch that game. That should be pretty decent. I like Mount St. Mary's. I like Bryant. Bryant has a guy, Michael Green III, who I think is really good. FDU should be the front runner. Jaleel Jenkins, a guy who I think is going to be a really talented player at the low level this year. It's, this conference made a lot of noise last year because Merrimack, first year in a D1 level, they won the conference. And they obviously can't play in the NCAA tournament or conference tournament because they're still transitioning to the Division I level. But they kind of took the league by storm. I have them 9th in the league, but I could very easily see them kind of climb back up. It is another league like the MAC where you could tell me, someone can make a run in the conference tournament and steal it away from someone, especially because they play at home courts for their conference tournament. But FDU should be not only a local team to watch, one of the better local teams for us to watch, Ryan, but the best team in this conference. They also benefited from Robert Morris leaving too, very much so.
Yeah, I would imagine so. We've talked about Western Kentucky, we've talked about Northern Kentucky, and now we're at the conference with Eastern Kentucky, the Ohio Valley Conference. You make the point that Belmont and Murray State have dominated this conference relatively recently over the past number of years, but you have a different team at number one in your conference projections.
Yeah, Austin Peay should be the best team, one of the better teams at the mid-major level. They have the returning conference player of the year and freshman of the year. Terry Taylor and Jordan Adams are going to be spectacular. They are a team that I could see stealing a game in March. But that being said, don't count out Belmont and Murray State. They've dominated the better part of a decade in this conference. Not having Adam Kunkel is going to really hurt Belmont, but Nick Mazinski is a guy who I really enjoy watching play. Murray State is a really good guard play in the backcourt, but I'm really high on Austin Peay this year, the Governors. So they are the governors of the conference in theory. If we're going the political theme of 2020, they should be really good. I really like them. And they, Ryan, I don't know when their first game is, but when they start playing, their team, I recommend you start watching right off the bat.
All right. So that's, if I'm going to watch them, all of you guys that are still listening, you're going to watch them too, and it'll be good use of your time. If you are still listening, by the way, we thank you greatly because we have reached the final 10 conferences in Division I college basketball. And to start off this final 10, we'll start with the Bill Walton Conference, the Pac-12. This conference gets a lot of jokes because this is the conference that Bill Walton calls games for, and he's always a trip when you listen to him broadcast a game, but it shouldn't take away from how entertaining this conference has been. At least in my opinion, I always enjoy watching the Pac-12. Oregon is at the top for you, but I know you like some other teams in this conference as well. And I imagine a few of these teams we're going to hear their name at the NCAA tournament in next year.
Yeah, the Pac-12 went through a stretch where they really weren't deep, but this year should be really good. I like Stanford. I like Arizona State. Remy Martin, I think, is a fantastic player for the Sun Devils. UCLA was the hottest team in the country going into March last year. Mick Cronin really kind of turned it on in his first season with the Bruins. Arizona will sneak in. USC has Evan Mobley, who is going to be a lottery pick in a draft next year. They can maybe be a bubble team, but the top five of this league will be really exciting. And then just to kind of bang through some of these other lower tier conferences, Ryan, and we'll stick with the power ones towards the end. Patriot League, Boston University should be really good this year. Colgate, wouldn't be surprised if they won. The SoCon, Furman, mid-major team to watch. UNC Greensboro, team to watch. Even Wofford, that's a team that everyone remembers a couple years ago. Southland Conference should be a two-horse race between Stephen F. Austin and Abilene Christian. The SWAC, Ryan, did you know some of these conferences I don't even think a lot of people know exist? The SWAC could be anybody. I've seen probably 4 or 5 different predictions. I have Grambling State. I could be wrong. I could be right. Who the hell knows with the SWAC? Texas Southern is the team that a lot of people might know from that league. The Summit League, South Dakota State should be the team that wins this. They had a player in Mike Dom for a number of years that was really good. So stick with the favorite there. That's a league kind of trending upward. The Sun Belt, Ryan, Little Rock, going to be fantastic. That's a team that you need to watch right off the bat as well. High scoring, exciting team, really good on the defensive side of the ball. They could win a couple of games in March. Really wouldn't be surprised about that. The WAC, shout out to our New Mexico State Aggie, David Austin Guest. His Aggies should have absolutely no issue in the WAC. And just like that in the West Coast Conference, Ryan, Gonzaga, one of the best teams in the country, they should have no issue in the West Coast Conference. So I think that leaves us with just the SEC, Ryan. So I just wanted to make sure we got to movie time with Glenn.
Yeah, because Glenn would
but
be
the
very
SEC,
upset if we did not
especially
Moana this week.
And especially if it took the backseat to college basketball, he would really, really get mad at me. So we're making sure it gets in there. Kentucky, Tennessee, LSU, any of which could win the SEC, Ryan. I mean, the SEC is going to be deep this year. I really like Arkansas. I really like Florida. Local guy, Scotty Lewis from Mater Dei, is going to take the next step at Florida with that program down there. Mike White has done a really good job there. Obviously, Auburn just came out yesterday. They're going to enact a self-imposed postseason ban. So that might actually benefit their program because I don't know if they were really going to be too high this year. But yeah, so we went through every conference. I had to make sure we got in movie time with Glenn, but I'm sure I'll shout it out throughout the year. If you're looking for teams that could win it all, Gonzaga, Baylor, Villanova, I can make the case for Kentucky. I can make the case for Duke. I could even, make the case for Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, but really fun season on tap, Ryan. And I think it should gain a lot of popularity with the fact that it used to be the NBA starts first and then college basketball. This year it's the flip side. So it's kind of like this is the appetizer to the NBA season starting.
I mean this in a good way, but I know a lot of people like myself have some extra time on their hands that maybe they wouldn't have. So maybe you fill that time up with some college basketball. That might be a good productive use of your time. Even maybe you just put it on in the background and you maybe clean your room up a little bit, fold some clothes, just get into it a little bit. It might be a good use of your time. Why not? Another good use of your time though would be watching Disney movies. And I feel like I'm back in school. Our assigned movie for the week was Moana. And this was a movie that was released back in 2016. So Moana is a Disney animated movie. An adventurous teenager sails out on a daring mission to save her people. During her journey, Moana meets the once mighty demigod Maui, who guides her in her quest to become a master wayfinder. Together, they sail across the open ocean on an action-packed voyage, encountering enormous monsters and impossible odds. Along the way, Moana fulfills the ancient quest of her ancestors and discovers the one thing she has always sought: her own identity. So that's Moana. I knew this movie was going to be good because it had Dwayne the Rock Johnson. So immediately I knew that it would be fine. It's got a great crew, great cast. It's got Ali Cravalho, who was Moana. Rachel House was Grandma Tala. Tamura Morrison was Chief Tui. Jermaine Clement was Tamatoa. Nicole Scherzinger was Cena. And Alan Tudyk was Hey Hey and Villager number 3. So great cast. This was a great film. I enjoyed it. So this was the discussion in our group chat was, where do you place it among Frozen and Frozen 2? We both agreed that we placed it in the middle. So if we had to go from 1 through 3, we had Frozen 2 1, we had Moana 2, and then Frozen 3. It was a lot of fun. If you're gonna watch a Disney animated movie, you can kind of understand where the plot's gonna go. So I mean, you kind of know what's gonna happen, but at the same time, I thought that this was just a beautifully designed movie. I liked the music in it. I liked the songs, and it's definitely something that I would watch again.
Yeah, I would. Obviously, we're comparing it with Frozen, where obviously it's snow and much different to the tropical vibes that we get in Moana, but very colorful movie, Ryan, in terms of like the ocean and the scenery and everything else. I really like the creativity. The coconut pirates made me laugh. That was pretty funny. Yeah, Glenn so far has been 4 for 4. I know you've watched one extra movie than I have, but for me personally, he's been 4 for 4 with these recommendations. I really like Moana. I think in terms of a rating, I'm going to give it an 8.1. So it's below Frozen 2, but above the original Frozen. I'm going to give it an 8.1 out of 10. And be mindful that I will rarely give out anything above 9. So 8.1, really solid movie. Very, very colorful. I enjoyed that aspect of it. I enjoyed the music, I think, more than Frozen, Ryan, just as a whole. I don't know why, but personally I did. Now we have Coco next week.
Yeah, I've heard that that's a very emotional movie, so I'm not looking forward to that in that
Yeah, me
aspect.
neither.
But I've
No.
heard that it's also a very, very good movie. It's gotten a lot of rave reviews. I remember hearing about how good it was at the time, and now I'll get to see it on my own. I gave Frozen an 8.6. I gave Frozen 2 somewhere in the low 9s. I'm going to give Moana an 8.7. It was better than Frozen. I don't know. So after watching these winter kind of movies with Frozen, it was nice to kind of just get back into that little summer vibe. I thought Dwayne the Rock Johnson was great. I thought Maui was a great character. It was a great movie. I definitely recommend it. So yeah, you said Glenn's 4 for 4. I'm gonna step it up. For me, he's 5 for 5. And once you watch the other Goofy movie, I'm sure you'll say he's 5 for 5 as well. But yeah, as Matt said, we got Coco on tap. He asked us if we had ever seen Monsters Inc., and I was extremely offended that he asked that. I know I haven't seen a lot of the recent ones, but come on,
That's a classic.
Don't ask me that question. So that
Were
was
you
episode.
in? Were you in Marmaru's class in high school when he had us watch Monsters University because we were seniors and we were getting ready to graduate? So he was preparing us for college by watching Monsters University. Were you in that class?
I think I was in the class, but it doesn't sound like I was. If it was either I wasn't there that day or I don't know. I don't remember watching Monsters University.
You got to watch that.
Class,
that's
though.
really good too. The Monsters movies are great. I was very offended as well, Ryan, because that is a classic movie from our younger days. back when you and I probably watched a lot more Disney content than we did now. But Glenn's getting us back into it. And Glenn he's a third of the way through Star Wars. So I'm really happy to see him getting on the Star Wars train. You need to go to a galaxy far, far away, Ryan, and watch that as well.
Okay. All right. I'll watch Glorp Glorp go through the Andromeda Galaxy at some point. Okay. Um, in all seriousness, I did say on Twitter last night, I've watched more Disney movies in the past 2 weeks than I have in like the past 10 years. And I think that directly correlates to how much better I've been feeling. So thank you, Glenn, for encouraging me to spend $11.99 a month on Disney Plus and then Hulu and ESPN. To end this episode, Tony Meatballs got indicted in Philadelphia, part of the mafia. So that's how we're going to end this episode. 73 years old, Tony Meatballs, mafia member. He got caught. So no, Joe Burrow tore his ACL, his MCL, and suffered other structural issues in his knee as well. So that was more damage than anticipated. So hopefully he comes back strong. Knock on wood. I want to thank you for listening to this episode of Best Available Podcast. Enjoy the holiday if you celebrate it on Thursday, and we will catch up on Monday. Talk to you guys later.